you looking to sharpen your budgeting skills? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast, where we talk about life, family, and how to afford it. And now, the Budget Couple themselves, Nate and Danielle.
Welcome to the Budget Couple Podcast. I'm Nate.
And I'm Danielle.
And this week we're going to take a look at some of the questions that we've received since our last call for questions. We're still going to be looking for more, so if you have questions, please let us know. But before we get into anything, we just want to ask you and implore you to leave reviews for us on iTunes or your podcast player of choice. It really helps grow the show and helps us reach a larger audience, and we greatly, greatly appreciate it. Also, please make sure you keep those questions coming. We have a lot of new content on the way because of you guys, and we sincerely appreciate it.
Yeah, we want to thank you guys for your awesome questions. You had a lot of good ideas that actually we haven't thought about or that, reminded us of something. So we really appreciate those of you who've sent us some suggestions. And we're actually going to tackle one of those today in this episode.
And the way we're going to kind of do this is we haven't received an enormous, unmanageable amount of questions. So there's enough for us to go through and kind of respond to people. And how we'll kind of handle these is we'll kind of sort through them, kind of group them together, and then answer them on air. But in addition to that, we're going to send out a personal email giving a little bit more detailed information about how we handle it ourselves. Things that maybe we wouldn't share online or things that are just more specific to that particular situation. So if you send us a question, expect to have it talked about on air and also receive a personal email from us. That is until if we receive 1,000 questions, that's just not going to happen. But for right now, I think we're okay doing all of that.
So we'll start this off with reading a little bit of the email that we received. And just to give a little bit of context and background, this one is really focusing on tracking some variable expenses and how to budget for all the different categories that you have to set up when you start your own budget. So I'll read a paragraph here briefly. We've been tracking our expenditures and budgeting for about 6 months now, so we've been able to create categories for most fixed and variable expenses. Our budget is fairly accurate each month. However, we have a difference of opinion when it comes to handling the variable expenses. So this is a couple talking, and they're having some kind of difficulties figuring out whether they lump all variable expenses together into maybe just a credit card category, or whether they break it down into more specific categories. So one person would like to break it down into around 13 categories, whereas the other person would like to lump them all together into just a credit card category. So that's the big question at hand here.
That question came from Kevin. Thank you very much, Kevin. We greatly appreciate the question, and we're going to take a stab at what we would do if this was our situation. So we have one person who wants 13 different variable expense areas, and then the other who just wants one kind of a lump credit card area because they're paying via the credit card. Now, there's a lot to do here, and I think we both agreed when we looked over this question, really researched what we thought would do. Some of the expenses of those 13 categories, we didn't really consider variable as far as what we put into our budget. Things like fuel, groceries, restaurant entertainment, and pet care, those are things that while you do have an option on paying how much they are, if you put them as more of a fixed item in your budget, it makes things a little bit easier in our opinion.
So for us, things like gas for our cars, pet care, groceries, yeah, they change a little bit each month, but they don't change all that much. Usually it's fairly similar from month to month. Dog food is the same each month. Our gas prices, we've basically tracked over a couple months, like how much on average it costs us to pay for gas for our now one gas car. And so we just know that. So we have that as a fixed line item in our budget. So yes, we have a lot of categories, but
I think 18 at last check.
Yeah, there is a lot of them, but most of them are just fixed costs. And yeah, they vary a little, like I said, but for us, we're okay with just keeping them as a fixed average for what they usually are each month. So we don't actually record or track them in any way. We just have them as those fixed costs. But a caveat there, if you do it that way, it is good to revisit maybe every few months, every 6 months, whatever it may be, to make sure those are accurate categories still. So make sure you're still spending the same amount on gas, or maybe your dog food went up in price, something like that.
Right. Like during the summer, I'm a teacher, so I'm off and we can reevaluate our gas costs because there's really only one of us driving. I drive during the summer, but not as much as I do during the school year. So we can reevaluate that. And if gas prices go crazy, we can evaluate at that point. But we're lucky in the fact that we have two pretty fuel efficient cars and we really only fill up the tank twice.
Well, one's very fuel efficient.
Yeah, it's infinitely fuel efficient. We really only fill up the tank maybe twice a month on the Civic, and So our cost there is pretty well fixed. But again, anything that has a general ballpark, like for groceries, we spend anywhere between $350 and $400. And if we spend under that, cool. If we spend over that, we need to readjust and figure out what's going on. But if we have a little bit of playroom in there, that's okay for us because our budget isn't so tied down, so specific that we need to figure out where every single penny goes.
Now, that might be the right call for some people. You know, some people might want to track it to every penny, at least for a little bit until you get a better sense of where you're spending. But we just really know on certain categories what we spend each month. So it's okay for us to leave that fixed. But we do have other areas where we do still record everything we spend. And that would be those kind of variable personal expenses. So that would be going out, restaurants, dinners. That would be household items like random stuff. It would also be our personal budgets. And like we've talked about before, we each have a personal budget set aside. So for those, we set ourselves a limit. Instead of having I guess it is a fixed cost each month, but we set a limit for ourselves that we choose. And then we don't go over that, or we try not to go over that. And we do record what we spend in order to stay on budget for that.
Right. Things like fuel, groceries, pet care, those are kind of things you don't have a choice on. You have to eat food. You have to get to work. You have to do those things. But on places where if we have entertainment, we don't have to go out to the movies. In fact, Danielle doesn't even like going out to the movies.
No, I don't.
She's a freak of nature. But we have choice in those things. So while we have fixed costs for certain things, we have fixed for other ones. But instead of kind of being an item, they're kind of a minus category where we kind of track exactly what's going on in each one of those.
It's much easier to overspend with going out than it is for your pet care, your gas bills. You know, it's certain things you just need to do, and they don't really change that much. Other things, you really have the opportunity to overspend and not know where your money's going.
Now, the question comes back, do we keep 13 categories, or do we keep one just kind of lump sum of where we spend the money or where we pay the money? And I think both of us agree that one area where you put in a whole bunch of stuff is not a good idea. Mainly because it's really, really, really easy to lose stuff when you have something that's not very specific. It doesn't have to be wildly specific, but it needs to be categorized in a place where you can easily find where you spent stuff on certain categories. So on this example, there's fuel for the wife and fuel for the husband. We would recommend just combining that into one fuel cost because it's not crazy important that we go through and have that set up for just each particular person. If you really want to track who's spending all that, you could, but again, it's not really that important to the budget, at least in our opinion, it's not. So for something like that, we combine that. There's also boat maintenance and boat fuel. Maybe combine that down into one category, depending on what's going on, so that things aren't crazy specific and everything's a little bit easier to handle. So if you can group things that are alike together, it makes things a lot easier to keep track of, but also allows you a little bit of wiggle room to kind of not have everything tied down exactly right on point every single time.
So in our budget, we tend to have one area that is variable, very variable, is truly variable, and is something we probably don't do very well when it comes to tracking, and that's the miscellaneous category. And that's actually not even something we have on our Google Sheets as an area where we write down each expense. It's more like this thing where we just throw in like, we spent $50, add another 50 to it. It's very haphazard, and it's something we probably should work on. And so that's an area where we do actually have a variable expense that we really need to figure out how to categorize. And for a lot of people, I think this one is things like car insurance, car maintenance, home maintenance, things that pop up throughout the year that are going to be coming, but you don't necessarily know when or how much. But you need some amount of money to be on hand when they do come up.
Right. Like in this last month that we had, I think 3 or 4 expenditures that we put on the totally variable miscellaneous one. One, we got some wood delivered to our house for our wood burning stove for the wintertime. That was $150. We had our Easy Pass renewal, so that we can go on the highways without having to stop at tolls. That was $100. And we had a couple of other things that kind of popped up and went on there. Now, those are costs that we generally know are going to happen, but we don't really plan for them and don't really plan when that's going to happen. And the key reason why we do that is because we can take that hit in our budget. If you cannot take that hit in your budget, you need to plan out a little bit more long term. Generally, we're left with about $2,000 extra each month in our budget.
If we do really well.
If we follow everything really well. We have about $2,000 with a little playroom in there. So if we go a couple $100 over and buy something or have to spend something unexpectedly, that's okay in our budget. But a lot of people don't have that. There's places where that doesn't hit.
So one way that you can tackle this, if you don't have that extra cushion of 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever it may be a month, you can actually try and come up with some idea of what these extra expenses are going to be throughout the year. So your car insurance, you should roughly know what it's going to be, maybe every 6 months or every year. You might have some idea of how much it'll cost for car maintenance. You know, oil changes, you know, generally what it would cost to replace brakes, something like that. You could kind of do the same thing for home maintenance too. So you could come up with some sort of number for what your yearly miscellaneous expenses are going to be. And then divide that number by 12 and just save that amount of money each month and put it aside into either a separate account or just add it onto your crash fund, add it into your savings account. And so it's always there. You have that extra amount. So when car insurance comes up, the money's already there. Or when a car maintenance comes up, like you have to replace all your tires, the money's already in there for you. So that's one way to tackle that, and probably a better way than what we do it actually.
Yeah, it's definitely a better way. It requires a little bit more work, a little bit more perseverance. But if you're a detail-oriented person or you're really a longer-term planner, that's a great way to do it. We don't personally do that because while I think we're both relatively detail-oriented, especially Danielle, I think that just adds a layer of complexity that we don't want to deal with.
We're just too lazy for it right now.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, we have a 2-year-old, we have 2 dogs. We both work. Danielle travels an hour and a half each way to work. So she loses 3 hours of her day just to travel. So we don't really want to complicate things if they're not needing to be complicated. Now, if we were really struggling with our budget and trying to make ends meet, or really struggling with keeping on the budget, we would probably do more of this. But we've been relatively good, especially since our last little budget shakeup. I think we've been much better since then.
And I do want to go back and add too, when it comes to the idea of lumping all of your credit card expenses together, for us, that would never work because we literally put everything on our credit card. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but we really don't use our debit card. We really don't take out of our checking throughout the month until the end of the month when we pay our bills. So we don't care too much what's in our checking account throughout the month. We really just care about tracking our expenses so we know that we'll have enough to pay it at the end. So with that said, we couldn't really do a credit card category because that would just include everything. And that really defeats the purpose of having a budget in the first place. Credit cards can really lead you to just spend money without really thinking. It can lead you to be over budget, but they can also be lots of good things too. I mean, rewards and among other things. So you have to just make sure that you're tracking your credit card expenses.
Yeah, we definitely really like using credit cards. That's probably not budgeting advice you hear from all people who talk about budgeting. But as far as credit cards, as long as you pay them off every month, it's not a big deal. But having everything just as a general category for credit card scares me deeply. It makes me have like little heart palpitations because I know what I personally would do if I had that as an option. We would spend a lot more money because I would not keep track of things. Things would fall through the cracks. And I already know that I'd be going out to lunch a lot more. I would be spending money on things I don't need to spend money on because my brain, again, when things go in, I buy something. And if I don't write it down immediately, I've already forgotten about it. And credit cards can be very dangerous with a brain like mine. So I need to have some specificity to my categories, but it doesn't need to be so specific that every little cent is tracked. We just want our budget is more as a general sense of direction of where we're going. That's not true of all people's budgets, but for our personal budget, we try to keep it as a direction of where we want to go and where we want to invest our money and time at.
So one other part of this email was around actually making fun of us a little bit, which I totally understand, for using Google Sheets for our budget. That we haven't explored any of those newfangled apps out there.
Wow, you sound so old right now.
for budgeting, and it's true, we haven't. I'm not really technically inclined. I just steer clear. I have actually only had a smartphone for like 2 years, if that.
You got it used from your mom and used.
And I think that was actually a year and a half ago.
I think it was iPhone 4S that you used that was beaten to the ground, and then we finally got a new iPhone for you probably about a year ago.
Yeah, less I think.
Because we went to a different carrier to save money, but that's the only reason we had to get a new phone.
So with that said, we haven't used any of the apps really, though we have heard of the ones that were suggested, and we think it's an awesome idea because not everyone's like us. You know, some people work really well with things like apps, others work well with just the sheets like us. Maybe some work well by printing it out and just writing it all down by hand.
That's how we did it originally.
Yeah. So, I mean, it depends on what your preferences are, but we really like the idea of thinking about these apps. So what we plan to do is review a few of them. We were going to choose a few, probably starting with the ones that were suggested, things like Every Dollar, Mint, and...
You Need a Budget.
Yes, You Need a Budget. YNAB, in other words. So we're going to take those, we're going to look them over, and then we're going to go ahead and try them out each for a month. And we'll have podcasts talking about our reviews and what we think of them and you know, what we found useful and what we didn't.
Yeah, and we're going to compare, contrast, see what's going on. So if you have any app suggestions that you want us to try for budgeting, please let us know. We're also going to do another app review a little bit later of things about kind of bill scheduling and how to pay bills and bill reminders. Some of the apps we're going to talk about already do that as built-in parts, but there are apps specifically built just to help you remember to pay your bills, which can be a challenge, quite honestly. So we're going to take a look at those, but if you have any suggestions for either budgeting apps that you want us to take a look at or going through and looking at bill reminders, please let us know. As a full disclaimer here, we like using Sheets because it's, I think, a lot more flexible than most apps, just because we can choose exactly what we want in there, exactly how it appears, all of that. We have total control of it. It requires a little bit more work in the setup, but it's not too big of a deal. And if you need to go through and actually start using a budget and you want to see a spreadsheet, on our website, we have our actual spreadsheet that we use. You can download it, you can use it, you can change whatever you need to make it yours. So if you're looking to just get started out, just pop over to our website, budgetcouple.com, and you can see everything that you need to do with that.
And we also plan to add to that a bit. We plan to do a short video just walking you through our spreadsheet and talking a little bit about some of our categories and what we've done.
Says the technically declined person.
I can do Excel and Google Sheets. I like them.
You live in a spreadsheet world.
I love spreadsheets. So that works really well for us.
All right, folks. Well, that's the end of this episode. Again, if you have any questions for us, please visit our website, budgetcouple.com. Click on that contact page and get in touch with us. We will email you back. I can promise you. We already sent a bunch out, and we have a bunch more going out very shortly. And if you want to talk about this episode in particular, go to budgetcouple.com/episode 16.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next time.
We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Budget Couple Podcast with your hosts, Nate and Danielle. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit budgetcouple.com. Make sure to check out the next episode of the Budget Couple Podcast, where we'll talk more about life, family, and how to afford it. We'll catch you next time.